The sun hung low over the savanna, spilling amber light across the tall, whispering grasses. In the quiet expanse, a lion lay motionless at the edge of a shallow watering hole, the stillness around him heavy, almost unnatural. His flank bore a dark, ragged wound, the edges raw and inflamed, and every shallow breath he drew caused a faint, pained groan to escape. There was no challenge in his posture, no trace of the usual regal authority that so often marked the apex predator. Instead, there was vulnerability, an exposed fragility that made the scene both arresting and quietly urgent. A small team of rangers, moving with the practiced patience of those who knew the land intimately, rounded the bend in the dusty track. Their eyes caught the unusual stillness immediately. One ranger lowered his binoculars, scanning the area carefully, noting the tension in the lion's body and the uneven rhythm of his breathing. They exchanged brief, wordless glances, each sensing what the other already knew. This was no ordinary pause in a predator's routine. This was a creature in need, exposed and alone. Slowly, deliberately they approached, making sure their movements were measured, non-threatening. The lion's ears twitched at the sound of their footsteps, a flicker of awareness in his otherwise exhausted gaze. Dust clung to his tawny coat, matted near the wound, and the water he had lapped earlier reflected his weary reflection. For a moment, he simply observed, muscles slack, head resting against the warm earth, as though he had given up the fight but had not yet surrendered completely. The team moved closer, their presence calm and unhurried. One ranger knelt a few steps away, speaking in soft tones, almost as if the words themselves could soothe pain. "It's okay, boy," he murmured, his voice low and steady, not demanding, not commanding. The lion blinked slowly, nostrils flaring, his body tensing slightly at the sound before relaxing again, unsure but curious, weighed down by fatigue. The sun painted a gentle glow on the blood-darkened fur, highlighting the delicate rise and fall of his chest with each laboring breath. Around the watering hole, life continued with quiet indifference. A flock of birds stirred in the acacia trees, their wings catching the light in brief flashes. The wind moved across the grasses in rolling waves, carrying the scent of earth, water, and distant wildflowers. Yet, in this small, intimate clearing, time seemed to fold inward, focused entirely on the lone lion, the fragile rhythm of his survival, and the careful, reverent attention of those who had come to offer aid. The wound was jagged but superficial enough that with careful treatment, he could recover, though the risk of infection and exhaustion was high. The rangers worked with practiced gentleness, cleaning away the crusted blood, applying a mild antiseptic, and observing the small signs of distress in the lion's posture and pupils. He flinched at first, the instinctive caution of a wild creature, but gradually the tension eased, a tacit acknowledgement that these strangers for now posed no threat. The lion shifted slightly, stretching a foreleg, shaking loose a few stray flies, his amber eyes meeting theirs with a fragile, fleeting awareness. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the savanna, and the lion, though still weakened, began to move with a tentative steadiness. The rangers gave him space, stepping back to let him reclaim the dignity of distance. His breathing evened, the shallow groans softened, and he rose slowly, each movement deliberate, measured, heavy with recovery and cautious resilience. The stillness around the watering hole remained, but it was no longer marked by despair. It was a quiet testament to survival, to the delicate balance between vulnerability and strength in the wild. As he limped toward the cover of tall grasses, the team watched in silence, the wind rustling through the savanna carrying both the scent of healing and the gentle weight of unspoken understanding. The lion paused at the edge of the clearing, glanced back once, and vanished into the amber waves, leaving behind a hush that seemed to linger long after he was gone, a quiet reverence that matched the fading light. The golden light of late afternoon stretched across the savanna, turning each blade of grass into a fragile thread of fire. The lion lay where he had shifted earlier, barely moving, his body pressed close to the dusty earth. The wound along his flank, jagged and darkened, throbbed with every shallow inhale, and the exhaustion etched into his posture made the air around him feel heavy. The usual dominance in his gaze had softened into a quiet alertness, a fragile wariness that spoke of pain more than fear. Even the low groan that escaped his throat seemed muted, as if he were conserving strength he could not afford to waste. The ranger team advanced slowly, stepping lightly over the uneven ground. Each movement was measured, deliberate, meant to signal calm rather than intrusion. Dust rose in pale wisps around their boots, and the lion's ears twitched, tracking the approach, but he did not flee. One ranger knelt a careful distance away, the warmth of the setting sun highlighting the sweat that clung to his brow. His voice was a gentle murmur, low and rhythmic, more felt than heard. "It's okay, girl," he whispered, as if speaking aloud might anchor her to courage. The other rangers spread out, forming a loose circle, eyes scanning for danger while allowing the lion room to breathe. He shifted slightly, the weight of his body dragging against the parched earth, muscles trembling with fatigue. A few flies hovered, persistent, around the wound, and he flicked his tail slowly, a restless, mechanical gesture, as if trying to swat away the irritation. The team noted the shallow breathing, the way his chest rose and fell unevenly, and the subtle tension in his haunches. This was a creature who had survived countless battles and hunts, yet now he was utterly dependent on careful human intervention. The ranger who approached closest moved with the patience of someone who understood both urgency and restraint. He crouched, keeping his hands visible, eyes locked on the lion's amber gaze to gauge trust. The lion watched him cautiously, muscles taut, but made no move to flee. Every step, every motion was deliberate, designed to minimize threat while allowing assessment. When he finally reached the edge of the wound, he laid a hand gently on the coarse fur surrounding the injury, palpating with careful pressure. The lion flinched, a brief, instinctive response, then stilled, sensing the deliberate care in the touch. The ranger's voice was almost a soft hum as he spoke, noting the depth and ragged edges of the gash. He realized, even as he worked slowly, that without intervention, the lion's strength would continue to drain. The sun cast long shadows across the clearing, illuminating the fine dust rising in the subtle breeze. Each careful touch, each whispered word, seemed to speak louder than the groans or the restless movement of the exhausted predator. There was a rhythm to the interaction, a quiet assessment, a measured response, and a patient persistence that refused to startle or provoke. Nearby, a small flock of weaver birds stirred in the acacia branches, their movements fleeting, almost inconsequential against the gravity of the moment. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry earth, faint water from the hole, and the coppery tang of blood. The lion shifted again, slow and deliberate, eyes half-lidded, weighing every movement, the faint twitch of his ears betraying attention even in fatigue. The ranger whispered again, voice barely above a breeze, "You're almost there." Not a command, not a plea, but a soft acknowledgement that care had arrived, steady and persistent. The depth of the injury became undeniable, the urgency clear. Without careful medical attention, the lion would not recover. Yet there was no panic, only quiet observation, measured preparation, and the steady presence of those who understood that the smallest misstep could undo the fragile trust being built. The sun sank lower, painting the savanna in muted golds and reds, and for a brief moment time seemed suspended, marked only by the shallow rhythm of a predator's breath and the gentle, reverent whispers of those who had come to save him. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the savanna in a wash of muted gold and burnt amber. The lion lay still for a moment, ears flicking, eyes half closed, measuring the movements of those around him. His breathing was shallow and uneven, each inhale accompanied by a soft, strained exhale. The rangers approached with the precision of those accustomed to the rhythms of the wild, every step deliberate, every hand visible, every gesture intended to reassure rather than startle. Dust rose in soft swirls beneath their boots, catching the fading light, and the lion's gaze tracked them carefully, amber eyes wary yet gradually acknowledging the presence of calm. Slowly, one ranger knelt beside him, hand hovering over the coarse fur near the wound. He murmured quietly, the voice low and even, "It's okay, boy. We're here." The lion responded with a soft, tentative roar, almost a whisper of sound, carrying both fear and the first glimmer of trust. His muscles twitched under the touch, but he did not recoil, and that small concession was enough to begin the delicate work of moving him. Each movement was choreographed with patience, the humans guiding without force, creating space and security as they prepared to lift and support his weight. The team worked in unison, their motions synchronized with the lion's, careful to avoid sudden pressure or startling gestures. One ranger gently coaxed him to his feet, hand resting lightly under the chest, another supporting his hindquarters, while a third remained close, observing the surrounding savanna for any signs of danger. Each step was slow, each adjustment made with acute awareness of the lion's pain and uncertainty. His head dipped slightly with every lift, groaning softly, but he remained present, responding to the calm, measured attention of those aiding him. As they guided him toward a shaded area near the water, the lion's movements were tentative, weighted with exhaustion, yet strengthened by the assurance of gentle support. The shallow roars continued, vibrating low in his chest, a communication that was neither fully trust nor full resistance, but something in between, a fragile acknowledgement of safety. The rangers spoke in hushed tones, offering soft words and quiet encouragement, never raising their voices, their presence steady and deliberate, a quiet anchor in the midst of vulnerability. When they reached a small clearing, the lion's breathing remained heavy, but his posture began to ease. The rangers knelt, carefully cleaning the jagged edges of the wound, brushing away dried blood, and applying antiseptic with slow, deliberate movements. The lion shifted occasionally, tail flicking, a low grumble escaping as he registered each touch, but the flinches grew shorter, the tense muscles gradually loosening under the careful ministrations. He dipped his head briefly toward the ranger, a fleeting glance that carried no words but held a trace of acknowledgement, the subtle recognition that the humans were present not as threat but as aid. Around them, the savanna continued its quiet rhythm. The wind rustled through the grasses, carrying the scent of earth, water, and distant wildflowers. A lone stork passed overhead, wings extended against the orange horizon. Yet within this small circle, the air was charged with an unspoken bond, the fragile beginning of trust forming in shared stillness. The lion's heavy breaths slowed, his soft roars replaced by occasional tentative sighs. Each exhale was a concession to patience, a small acceptance of care. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the clearing, and for the first time, the lion stood with a sense of cautious stability. The team stepped back slightly, giving him space while remaining vigilant, their presence an invisible scaffold of safety. The shallow roars continued, softer now, mingling with the whisper of wind through the grass, marking the beginning of something delicate yet undeniable, a connection born not of force, but of careful attention, respect, and the quiet persistence of human hands and voices that understood both pain and patience. Days passed under the vast, unchanging sky, each one marked by quiet vigilance and careful attention. The lion, once a figure of fragility, began to shift with small, deliberate movements, testing the strength returning to his limbs. His breaths, once shallow and strained, now came in deeper, steadier rhythms, punctuated occasionally by the low, rumbling sounds of contentment or irritation. The rangers observed patiently from a measured distance, allowing him space to regain control over his body while continuing the gentle care that had been necessary for survival. Every approach was calculated, every touch measured, yet over time the lion's wariness began to soften, a subtle easing in his posture that mirrored the healing taking place beneath his fur. Each morning, he emerged from the small shaded area near the watering hole with slightly more confidence, stepping slowly over the uneven ground, muscles flexing in careful rhythm. He sniffed at the soft wind, the sense of the earth and water mingling with the lingering smell of the ranger's presence. At first, he kept a cautious distance, his amber eyes tracking each movement, ears flicking, tail swishing in gentle agitation. But as the sun rose higher, warming the savanna, he began to allow the team closer, shifting his weight deliberately, testing trust in gestures rather than words. His soft roars were intermittent now, more murmurs than warnings, carrying a tone of curiosity and tentative engagement. One afternoon, as the team approached to offer water and check the wound, the lion paused. The careful distance he maintained shrank, imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably. His steps were slow but steady, deliberate as if he weighed each movement, yet no trace of panic remained. The ranger who had first knelt beside him, the one who had whispered, guided, and applied care, waited with practiced patience, hands relaxed, eyes soft, allowing space for choice. The lion's gaze met his, amber eyes wide, observing, calculating, yet showing no intent to flee. Then, in a motion both subtle and profound, the lion lowered his massive head and rested it against the ranger's shoulder. The weight was significant, yet gentle, carried not in force but in trust. The ranger froze for a heartbeat, then eased his hands onto the thick mane, fingers brushing lightly against fur still carrying the faint scent of the wild. There was no sound, no words necessary, only the quiet acknowledgement of a bond formed through patience and care. Around them, the savanna continued, indifferent yet alive, the grasses shifting with the breeze, the sun dipping lower, the distant call of a lone bird echoing faintly. Other members of the team observed from a few steps away, keeping distance to maintain the intimacy of the moment. The lion's eyes closed briefly, a soft exhale escaping his massive chest, his body still against the ranger as if testing the permanence of trust. Each subtle movement of his head, each quiet sigh, communicated a depth of understanding that transcended language, a gesture born of experience, of survival, of human hands that had caused no harm and offered only care. The ranger's voice was a mere whisper, almost lost in the wind. "It's all right, boy. You're safe now." No more was needed. The gesture lingered, not for show, but as a quiet testament to resilience and connection. The lion shifted slightly, enough to rise onto all fours, yet he lingered close, brushing against the ranger's leg with measured weight. There was an unspoken acknowledgement, a recognition that the bond, fragile at first, had taken root in shared silence, in calm presence and in unwavering patience. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a warm, muted glow across the savanna, the lion finally stepped back, stretching with deliberate care, but still casting occasional glances at the humans who had saved him. The clearing remained quiet, filled only with the subtle rhythms of life, the whisper of wind, the soft rustle of grass, and the faint sound of breath, heavy but steady, marking not just recovery, but the first true, unspoken trust formed between predator and human. The savanna stretched wide under the fading light of dusk, a sea of gold and amber that seemed to hold its breath. The lion moved steadily, each step confident and sure, his muscles flexing with the strength that had returned through days of careful care and patient observation. The wound that had once threatened his survival was now a faint scar, barely visible beneath the tawny fur, and the exhaustion that had once made him fragile was replaced by a steady rhythm of movement and purpose. He paused near the edge of the clearing, sniffing the air, ears twitching to the subtle sounds of the approaching night, attuned to the quiet shifts in the world around him. The rangers followed at a cautious distance, hands relaxed, bodies angled to maintain space, giving the lion the dignity of choice. Each carried a quiet awareness of the fragile trust that had formed between them, a connection built not in words but in presence, patience, and gentle care. The lion's eyes, amber and steady, flicked toward them as he moved. There was a pause, a subtle glance that lingered long enough to convey recognition, a soft acknowledgement that he remembered the hands that had guided him, the voices that had whispered calm through fear. The gesture was unspoken, yet heavy with meaning, a silent thankfulness that needed no translation. The grasses swayed around him, golden waves stretching toward the horizon, and the sun dipped lower, setting fire to the sky in shades of orange and crimson. The air carried the scent of earth, water, and the faint trace of the human presence that had become a part of this small chapter of his life. The lion sniffed the wind once more, muscles tensing briefly before releasing, and then he turned, moving with a purposeful grace toward the distant hills where his pride awaited. Each step was measured, deliberate, yet imbued with the freedom that only a predator fully restored could carry. Behind him, the rangers slowed, watching with quiet reverence. Their footsteps were soft against the dry earth, eyes tracing the line of his back as he navigated the tall grasses. No words were spoken, none were needed. The bond formed in shared silence over days of care was enough to fill the space between them. They had offered trust, patience, and gentle intervention, and in return, they received the subtle acknowledgement of a creature who would forever carry that memory in the folds of instinct and experience. As the lion neared a small rise, the outline of his pride became visible in the dimming light. Adults and younger lions shifted in recognition, tails flicking, muscles flexing, yet they waited, allowing the returning figure to reclaim his place. The lion stepped forward, moving among them with a quiet authority tempered by the humility of survival. He paused once more, just long enough to glance back over his shoulder, eyes meeting the humans who had remained unseen but unwavering. There was no hesitation, no plea, only a fleeting connection, a wordless acknowledgement of the hands that had held his life with care. Then, as the sun's final rays spilled across the savanna, he turned fully, merging with the pride in a seamless flow of movement, disappearing into the waves of grass that shimmered like liquid gold. The rangers stepped back, their own figures swallowed by the amber light, hearts quiet with the weight of what they had witnessed. There was no triumph, no fanfare, only the gentle, persistent reminder that trust, patience, and care could bridge worlds, even between predator and human. The clearing remained still, the wind stirring the grasses, carrying the faint scent of earth and life, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures beginning to rise. The memory of the lion lingered, a silent imprint of resilience and connection, a story etched into the vast, golden expanse of the savanna. The humans turned slowly, walking away with steady, deliberate steps, carrying with them the quiet weight of gratitude, awe, and the understanding that some bonds, though unspoken, leave an enduring mark on both heart and horizon.